My girlfriend secretly used dating apps to cheat, then called me crazy when I found out about her double life. My name is Alex, 28M, and I thought I had a pretty solid relationship with Taylor, 27F. We'd been together for almost 3 years, and things were good, or so I believed. Taylor and I shared an apartment, had mutual friends, and were planning to adopt a dog soon. She was the person I'd talk to about everything. When I imagined my future, it was always with her by my side. I never thought she'd be capable of hiding something as huge as what I found out. Things started to feel off a few months back. Taylor was always on her phone, far more than usual, even when we were out together. She'd go to the bathroom and stay in there for what felt like ages, always with her phone in hand. At first, I brushed it off, convincing myself that I was being paranoid. She's always been a social media junkie, posting pictures of us, tagging me in memes. It seemed harmless. But then I noticed she'd stopped sharing as much, and some of her posts were suddenly missing. I didn't think much of it, chalking it up to the usual phases people go through. But one night, while she was asleep, her phone lit up on the nightstand. I glanced at it and saw a notification from a dating app. I remember thinking, what the hell? Why would she have a dating app on her phone? Curiosity and dread churned in my stomach, and I couldn't stop myself from taking a closer look. I picked up her phone, and what I found was enough to shatter everything I thought I knew about our relationship. She had not just 1, but 3 dating apps installed, apps I didn't even recognize at first. The profiles were detailed, with recent photos of her looking done up in ways I hadn't seen in a while. The bios were crafted, portraying her as single and ready to meet up. Messages flooded her inbox, and as I scrolled through them, I felt a hot wave of anger rise within me. Men were telling her how beautiful she was, setting up dates, and she was responding like she was genuinely interested. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. My mind raced with questions I didn't have the answers to. How long had this been going on? Who else knew? How could she do this to me? I was devastated, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions until I had all the facts. The next morning, I confronted Taylor. I laid it all out, telling her I'd seen the notifications and even saw some of the messages. She froze, her face draining of color, but then, instead of breaking down or apologizing, she laughed. A cold, dismissive laugh that took me completely off guard. "Oh, Alex, you're being ridiculous," she said, crossing her arms. "Do you really think I'd use a dating app? I downloaded them ages ago to see what they were like, but I'm not actually using them. You're just overreacting." My head was spinning. How could she deny it when I'd seen the messages with my own eyes? I explained that her conversations were current, that they were talking about meeting up soon. She rolled her eyes, accusing me of being insecure, of trying to control her. She twisted it all, making me feel like I was the one in the wrong for even looking at her phone in the first place. "Honestly, Alex, maybe you're just jealous," she said, a sneer in her voice. "Maybe you're projecting because you're the one who's not happy in this relationship." I was stunned. She was flipping it all back onto me, and for a moment, she almost had me questioning myself. But I knew what I'd seen. I wasn't crazy. I'd seen the explicit conversations, the detailed plans to meet up, the way she portrayed herself as single and ready to mingle. When I pushed further, refusing to let her gaslight me, she became furious. Her voice rose, accusing me of invading her privacy, saying that my lack of trust was what was actually ruining our relationship. She stormed out, slamming the door, leaving me standing there, bewildered and hurt. In the days that followed, things grew colder between us. She barely spoke to me, and whenever I tried to bring it up, she'd dismiss me, saying I was making a big deal out of nothing. She started coming home late, claiming she had work events or meetups with friends. But I knew better. My mind was filled with images of her sneaking off to meet these strangers, betraying me while making me feel like the unstable one. One night, after she returned home, I tried once again to confront her, hoping we could have an honest conversation and figure out what was really going on. But she looked me dead in the eyes, her expression cold and emotionless, and said, "If you can't trust me, maybe you're the one who needs help, not me." Her words stung. She was playing the victim, pretending like she hadn't shattered my trust and our relationship. I was beginning to feel trapped in this twisted reality, where nothing I said or did would make a difference. She was determined to rewrite the narrative, painting me as the insecure, jealous boyfriend, while she continued living this double life behind my back. But I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I was done being manipulated, done letting her gaslight me into silence. I decided then that I would get to the bottom of this, no matter what it took. I needed proof, concrete evidence that I wasn't losing my mind. I knew it was time to start digging deeper, even if it meant confronting some ugly truths I wasn't prepared for. I started gathering every bit of evidence I could find. I wasn't about to let Taylor twist things any further. It was clear she'd go to any length to deny and deflect, so I needed concrete proof to confront her once and for all. First, I checked her social media. I scrolled back through her posts, and it struck me how meticulously she'd crafted her online persona. She'd always shared photos of us, tagged me in posts, and made it look like we had this perfect, happy relationship. But then I noticed a subtle shift. Over the past few months, her posts had slowly become more ambiguous. Pictures of her at places without me, vague captions about me time, and an increasing number of photos where she was dressed up and out with friends I'd never met. As I dug deeper, I found some strange patterns. She tagged certain locations that she hadn't mentioned to me, places in the city I'd never heard her talk about. I started piecing together a rough timeline, noting how often she'd post from these places. My suspicions grew stronger. It seemed like she'd been living a double life, hiding things right under my nose. But I needed more than just vague social media clues. I needed to find something that she couldn't deny. So one night, while she was asleep, I went back to her phone. This time, I focused on her message history. She'd gotten smarter though. She'd deleted most of the conversations I'd found before, likely trying to cover her tracks. But she hadn't erased everything. I found some older messages between her and a guy named Jason, a name I didn't recognize. They were flirtatious, filled with winking emojis and inside jokes that made my stomach turn. He'd asked when she'd be able to see him again, and she'd replied with a coy, "Soon, babe." I took screenshots, sending them to my own phone for safekeeping. It felt sick to see those words coming from her, knowing she'd been hiding this from me for who knows how long. But I knew that if I confronted her now, she'd just accuse me of snooping and turn it all back on me. I needed something irrefutable, something that would force her to admit what she'd done. The next morning, I decided to try a different approach. I told her I'd be going out of town for the weekend to visit a friend. She seemed indifferent, barely looking up from her phone as she muttered, "Have fun." It stung, seeing how little she cared, but it was exactly the reaction I needed. If she thought I'd be gone, maybe she'd let her guard down. I packed a bag, grabbed my keys, and left. But instead of heading out of town, I parked a few streets away and waited. I sat in my car, watching our apartment from a distance, feeling like some kind of private investigator in my own life. Hours went by, and I started to question myself. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe she really wasn't planning anything, and I was the one obsessing over nothing. But then I saw her emerge from the building, dressed up in a way I hadn't seen her in months. Tight dress, high heels, makeup done to perfection. My heart raced as she got into her car and drove off. I followed her, keeping a safe distance, my mind whirling with anger and anxiety. She led me across town, finally stopping at a trendy-looking bar I'd never heard of. She parked, checked her reflection, and went inside. I waited a few minutes, then decided to follow her in. I kept my head down, trying to stay out of sight, but my eyes never left her. I watched as she slid into a booth with a man, Jason. I recognized him from the photos in her messages. They were laughing, leaning close, looking like a couple completely engrossed in each other. I felt a surge of rage and betrayal, but I forced myself to stay calm. I took out my phone and snapped a few photos, my hands shaking as I watched them together. It was all the confirmation I needed. She'd lied to my face, called me crazy, all while she was sneaking around behind my back. But it wasn't enough to just catch her here. I wanted to know how deep this went. I stayed until they left, following them as they drove back to his place. I watched as they went inside together, disappearing behind the door. It felt like a knife twisting in my gut, seeing her walk into another man's home. But I was determined to see this through. I waited outside, my mind racing with thoughts of how I'd confront her, what I'd say, how I'd make her finally face the truth. After a couple of hours, she came back out alone. I followed her back to our apartment, then parked and waited a few minutes to collect myself before going inside. When I walked in, she was in the kitchen, acting like nothing had happened. She looked up at me, giving me a casual smile. It was chilling, how effortlessly she pretended, how easily she lied to my face. "Oh, hey," she said, barely glancing up from the fridge. "I didn't expect you back so soon. Thought you were staying the whole weekend." I forced a smile, holding back the anger boiling inside me. "Change of plans," I replied, my voice tight. "Figured I'd come back early." She shrugged, acting unfazed, and I felt the last bit of patience I had slipping away. I wanted to scream, to throw everything out in the open, but I held back. I needed to gather more, to make sure that when I confronted her, there was no way she could weasel her way out. I was done playing her games, but I wasn't about to let her destroy me with her lies. For now, I'd play along, let her think I was oblivious, but in reality, I was setting the stage for a confrontation that would leave no room for denial. I'd give her just enough rope to hang herself with, and when the time came, I'd be ready. She wouldn't see it coming. I started gathering every bit of evidence I could find. I wasn't about to let Taylor twist things any further. It was clear she'd go to any length to deny and deflect, so I needed concrete proof to confront her once and for all. First, I checked her social media. I scrolled back through her posts, and it struck me how meticulously she'd crafted her online persona. She'd always shared photos of us, tagged me in posts, and made it look like we had this perfect, happy relationship. But then I noticed a subtle shift. Over the past few months, her posts had slowly become more ambiguous. Pictures of her at places without me, vague captions about me time, and an increasing number of photos where she was dressed up and out with friends I'd never met. As I dug deeper, I found some strange patterns. She'd tagged certain locations that she hadn't mentioned to me, places in the city I'd never heard her talk about. I started piecing together a rough timeline, noting how often she'd post from these places. My suspicions grew stronger. It seemed like she'd been living a double life, hiding things right under my nose. But I needed more than just vague social media clues. I needed to find something that she couldn't deny. So one night, while she was asleep, I went back to her phone. This time, I focused on her message history. She'd gotten smarter though. She'd deleted most of the conversations I'd found before, likely trying to cover her tracks, but she hadn't erased everything. I found some older messages between her and a guy named Jason, a name I didn't recognize. They were flirtatious, filled with winking emojis and inside jokes that made my stomach turn. He'd asked when she'd be able to see him again, and she'd replied with a coy, "Soon, babe." I took screenshots, sending them to my own phone for safekeeping. It felt sick to see those words coming from her, knowing she'd been hiding this from me for who knows how long. But I knew that if I confronted her now, she'd just accuse me of snooping and turn it all back on me. I needed something irrefutable, something that would force her to admit what she'd done. The next morning, I decided to try a different approach. I told her I'd be going out of town for the weekend to visit a friend. She seemed indifferent, barely looking up from her phone as she muttered, "Have fun." It stung, seeing how little she cared, but it was exactly the reaction I needed. If she thought I'd be gone, maybe she'd let her guard down. I packed a bag, grabbed my keys, and left. But instead of heading out of town, I parked a few streets away and waited. I sat in my car, watching our apartment from a distance, feeling like some kind of private investigator in my own life. Hours went by, and I started to question myself. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe she really wasn't planning anything, and I was the one obsessing over nothing. But then I saw her emerge from the building, dressed up in a way I hadn't seen her in months, tight dress, high heels, makeup done to perfection. My heart raced as she got into her car and drove off. I followed her, keeping a safe distance, my mind whirling with anger and anxiety. She led me across town, finally stopping at a trendy-looking bar I'd never heard of. She parked, checked her reflection, and went inside. I waited a few minutes, then decided to follow her in. I kept my head down, trying to stay out of sight, but my eyes never left her. I watched as she slid into a booth with a man, Jason. I recognized him from the photos in her messages. They were laughing, leaning close, looking like a couple completely engrossed in each other. I felt a surge of rage and betrayal, but I forced myself to stay calm. I took out my phone and snapped a few photos, my hands shaking as I watched them together. It was all the confirmation I needed. She'd lied to my face, called me crazy, all while she was sneaking around behind my back. But it wasn't enough to just catch her here. I wanted to know how deep this went. I stayed until they left, following them as they drove back to his place. I watched as they went inside together, disappearing behind the door. It felt like a knife twisting in my gut, seeing her walk into another man's home. But I was determined to see this through. I waited outside, my mind racing with thoughts of how I'd confront her, what I'd say, how I'd make her finally face the truth. After a couple of hours, she came back out alone. I followed her back to our apartment, then parked and waited a few minutes to collect myself before going inside. When I walked in, she was in the kitchen, acting like nothing had happened. She looked up at me, giving me a casual smile. It was chilling, how effortlessly she pretended, how easily she lied to my face. "Oh, hey," she said, barely glancing up from the fridge. "I didn't expect you back so soon. Thought you were staying the whole weekend." I forced a smile, holding back the anger boiling inside me. "Change of plans," I replied, my voice tight. "Figured I'd come back early." She shrugged, acting unfazed, and I felt the last bit of patience I had slipping away. I wanted to scream, to throw everything out in the open, but I held back. I needed to gather more to make sure that when I confronted her, there was no way she could weasel her way out. I was done playing her games, but I wasn't about to let her destroy me with her lies. For now, I'd play along, let her think I was oblivious. But in reality, I was setting the stage for a confrontation that would leave no room for denial. I'd give her just enough rope to hang herself with, and when the time came, I'd be ready. She wouldn't see it coming. The days that followed felt like a twisted waiting game. Every time I saw her, every time she acted like nothing was wrong, my anger grew. But I kept my cool, playing the role of the unsuspecting boyfriend while watching her every move. I started noticing more things that I hadn't before, subtle glances at her phone, secretive smiles, texts she'd quickly hide when I entered the room. It was as if I'd opened my eyes to a world I'd been blind to for months. I couldn't stop thinking about how she'd accused me of being paranoid, gaslighting me into believing I was the problem. But now, with each lie she told, my resolve grew stronger. I spent my free time collecting more evidence, determined to catch her in the act with irrefutable proof. I'd waited long enough, and it was time to make my move. One night, after she'd fallen asleep, I snuck back to her phone. I had to be careful. She'd become more secretive and had started keeping her phone close, even taking it with her to the bathroom. But tonight, she'd left it charging in the living room. I went through it quickly, heart pounding, knowing that I didn't have much time. I found a hidden folder of photos that hadn't been there before. My blood boiled as I scrolled through them. Selfies she'd taken in various states of undress, ones she'd clearly sent to other men. My stomach twisted as I found a conversation with Jason, the guy from the bar. It was explicit, filled with images and messages that painted a painful picture of their affair. I took screenshots, saving them to my phone, but the more I looked, the more I found. There were other names too, other men she'd been messaging, each conversation more graphic and revealing than the last. It was like she had a whole separate life, one filled with people I'd never known about. The worst part was that she seemed to enjoy it, relishing in the attention, using each man for whatever validation she could squeeze out of them. She told them lies, each one more elaborate than the last, pretending to be someone else entirely. I felt sick. I'd been dating a stranger. I realized then that this wasn't just an affair with one person. This was a pattern, a game she'd been playing behind my back. She had no remorse, no guilt, just a craving for attention that she'd satisfy at any cost. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of it all. How long had she been doing this? Had she ever truly cared about me? Or was I just another part of her charade? That night, I barely slept. I lay there, my mind replaying every memory, every conversation, every moment that now felt like a lie. I thought about confronting her right then and there, but something held me back. I wanted to hurt her the way she'd hurt me. I wanted her to feel the same betrayal, the same pain, the same helplessness I felt. But I knew that losing my temper wouldn't accomplish anything. I needed to be strategic, to make sure that when I finally exposed her, there would be no way for her to twist the narrative. The next morning, I acted normal, keeping my voice light, pretending everything was fine. She didn't suspect a thing. She kissed me on the cheek, smiled, and went about her morning routine as if our entire relationship wasn't built on lies. It was surreal, watching her go about her day, completely oblivious to the fact that I knew her secrets. Over the next few days, I started gathering more evidence, backing up every message, every photo, every incriminating detail. I even managed to track down a few of the other men she'd been talking to, finding their profiles online. They had no idea who I was, of course, but seeing their faces filled me with anger. They were strangers, just like her, living in a world of deception and manipulation. I knew I needed a plan, something that would expose her for the fraud she was. I decided that I'd confront her in front of her friends, the people she'd lied to, the ones who'd been pulled into her web of deceit. I wanted her to feel the humiliation I felt, to see the looks of betrayal on their faces when they realized she'd used them too. It wasn't enough to just catch her. I wanted her entire world to come crashing down. The opportunity presented itself sooner than I expected. She planned a small get-together at our apartment, inviting a few close friends over for drinks. It was supposed to be a casual night, one of those gatherings where everyone laughed, shared stories, and pretended that their lives were perfect. I decided that would be the night I exposed her. As her friends arrived, I greeted them with a forced smile, trying to keep my anger under control. I could barely look at her, knowing what she'd done, but I had to keep up the act for a little longer. She had no idea what was coming, laughing and chatting as if she hadn't betrayed me in the worst possible way. When everyone was settled, I took a deep breath, bracing myself for the confrontation. I cleared my throat, drawing everyone's attention. "I have something to share," I began, my voice steady, though my hands shook. "I've recently learned some things about Taylor that I think you all deserve to know." She looked at me, her face turning pale, realizing too late that I wasn't playing along anymore. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through the screenshots, the messages, the photos, and one by one, I laid out the evidence in front of everyone. Her friends gasped, their expressions shifting from confusion to shock to disgust as they saw the proof of her deceit. Taylor's face twisted, first with anger, then desperation, as she realized that her lies had finally caught up with her. "You've been lying to all of us," I said, my voice filled with a mix of hurt and anger. "Not just to me, but to every single person here. You've been living a double life, pretending to be someone you're not, using people for your own gain. And now everyone knows." She tried to defend herself, stumbling over her words, throwing out weak excuses, blaming me, saying I'd driven her to this. But no one was listening. Her friends looked at her with a mixture of pity and contempt, realizing that the person they thought they knew had been a fabrication all along. One by one they left, each one walking out the door without looking back. When the last one was gone, Taylor turned to me, her face twisted with rage. "You had no right," she spat, her voice shaking. "You're insane. You're a psychopath." I looked at her, feeling nothing but a hollow sense of satisfaction. I'd exposed her, torn down the life she'd built on lies, and for once, she couldn't manipulate her way out of it. "This is your doing, Taylor," I replied, my voice calm. "You've hurt me, you've hurt them, and now you have to live with the consequences." She looked at me, her eyes filled with hatred, but I knew I'd finally taken back control. She could scream, curse, and blame me all she wanted, but it wouldn't change the truth. Her lies were laid bare, and there was no one left to believe them. After her friends left, Taylor and I stood in silence, the weight of what had just happened settling between us. She looked at me, her face pale and twisted with rage. There was something else in her eyes, a flicker of fear. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that she'd lost control of the situation. I'd stripped away her facade, laid bare the truth she'd hidden for so long, and there was no one left to stand by her. But Taylor wasn't one to go down quietly. I should have anticipated her next move, but even now, after everything I'd learned, she still had the power to catch me off guard. "You think you're some kind of hero, don't you?" she sneered, her voice venomous. "You think you've won? You haven't won anything. In fact, you just made things worse for yourself. You'll regret this." I raised an eyebrow, crossing my arms as I watched her unravel. "I've already lost everything, Taylor. You've taken everything from me, my trust, my dignity. So what exactly do I have left to lose?" She laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that sent a chill down my spine. "Oh, you'll see. You think you're untouchable just because you got a few screenshots. You don't know who you're dealing with. I've had people wrapped around my finger for years, and you're just another pawn in my game." The words stung, but I wasn't about to let her see that. Instead, I leaned in, keeping my voice calm and steady. "Then prove it, Taylor. Show me who you really are, because from where I'm standing, you're nothing but a coward hiding behind lies." She bristled, her hands clenching into fists. I half expected her to lash out, to throw something, but instead she straightened up, her face morphing into an icy mask of determination. Without another word, she stormed past me, grabbing her coat and heading for the door. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Part of me had expected her to stay and continue the fight, but watching her leave filled me with a strange sense of relief. It was over, or so I thought. The next morning, I woke up to a flood of messages on my phone. At first, I assumed it was the usual aftermath, friends checking in, people gossiping about the previous night's revelations. But as I scrolled through the notifications, a sinking feeling settled in my stomach. Taylor had taken her revenge, and she'd done it in the most public way possible. She posted a series of photos and messages on social media, twisting the story to make herself the victim. She claimed I was abusive, that I'd been controlling, that I'd pushed her to seek comfort elsewhere. She painted herself as a woman trapped in a toxic relationship, forced to turn to others because I'd isolated and mistreated her. The worst part, she'd attached screenshots of private moments between us, moments that, taken out of context, made me look like the villain. My phone buzzed with messages from friends, family, even co-workers, all demanding explanations, some expressing their disappointment, others voicing their support. My mind raced as I tried to process the damage she'd done. She hadn't just hurt me, she'd destroyed my reputation, turned people against me, and made it impossible for me to defend myself. I spent the next few hours frantically reaching out to the people closest to me, explaining the situation, sharing my side of the story. Some believed me, but others had already made up their minds. Taylor was a master manipulator, and she'd played her part to perfection. She'd crafted a narrative that cast me as the villain, erasing her own guilt and painting herself as the innocent victim. The more I tried to fight back, the more I realized just how deeply she'd embedded herself into my life, and just how far she was willing to go to destroy me. In the days that followed, I became a pariah. People I'd once considered friends turned their backs on me, whispering behind my back, casting suspicious glances my way. The fallout spread to my work, with colleagues distancing themselves, unwilling to associate with someone whose personal life had become a public spectacle. It felt like I was living in a nightmare, each day worse than the last, with no way out. But I wasn't about to let her win. I was tired of playing defense, tired of letting her control the narrative. I decided to take matters into my own hands, to fight back in the only way I knew how, by exposing the truth in a way she couldn't ignore. I spent hours digging through everything I had, every piece of evidence, every message, every lie she told. I compiled it into a detailed account, one that laid out the full extent of her betrayal. I wasn't about to let her smear my name without a fight. If she wanted to play dirty, then I'd meet her on her own terms. That night, I posted my side of the story, complete with screenshots, detailed accounts, and a timeline that left no room for doubt. I knew it was risky, that it could backfire, but I was out of options. The damage was done, and I had nothing left to lose. Within hours, my post went viral. People began to take notice, questioning her version of events, digging deeper into the web of lies she'd spun. Friends and acquaintances reached out, some apologizing, others expressing their shock at the depth of her deception. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was enough. I'd reclaimed some semblance of control, and I was no longer the silent victim in her twisted game. The fallout was brutal. Taylor's reputation took a hit, and she found herself on the receiving end of the same scrutiny she tried to avoid. But I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel the satisfaction I'd hoped for. All I felt was a hollow sense of emptiness, a realization that in our quest to destroy each other, we'd both lost something irreplaceable. She sent me a message late that night, a single sentence that lingered in my mind long after I'd read it. "You'll never escape me." It was a chilling reminder that this war was far from over, that as long as she was in my life, I'd never truly be free. As I sat there, staring at the screen, I knew I had a choice to make. I could continue down this path, locked in a battle that would only bring more pain, or I could walk away, leaving the wreckage behind and starting anew. It wasn't an easy decision, but I knew what I had to do. In the end, I deleted her number, blocked her on every platform, and made a promise to myself to never look back. I'd lost friends, my reputation, and a piece of myself in the process, but I'd also gained something I hadn't had before, a chance to rebuild, to find peace in the absence of chaos. Taylor had taken everything from me, but she couldn't take away my will to survive. And for the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, I could leave the past behind and start anew. Months passed, and I managed to carve out a new life for myself, far from the shadow of Taylor's betrayal. I moved to a new city, started a new job, and cut ties with almost everyone who had known us. I'd done my best to put it all behind me, but the scars lingered, reminders of the chaos she'd left in her wake. I'd thought I was free, that I could finally breathe without the weight of her presence looming over me. But just when I began to feel like I was regaining some semblance of normalcy, I received an email that shattered my fragile peace. It was from an anonymous account, but the message was unmistakably hers. Attached was a single video file, along with a message: "I told you you'll never escape me." I hesitated, my hand hovering over the play button. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to delete the message and continue with my life. But I knew she wouldn't stop. She'd made that abundantly clear. I clicked play, bracing myself for whatever she had planned next. The video began with a series of screenshots of our old messages, moments we'd shared back when things were good, or so I'd thought. Then it cut to photos of me with friends, snippets of conversations I'd had, images from my new life in this new city. My stomach twisted as I realized what this meant. Taylor had been watching me, following me even now, months after I'd left her behind. She hadn't let go. She'd merely shifted her tactics, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. The video ended with a final message: "I can destroy you anytime I want. You belong to me, even if you don't know it yet." A chill ran through me. Taylor had moved past direct confrontation. Now she was content to let me know that I was never truly alone. She was everywhere, a ghost haunting the corners of my life, an ever-present reminder that no matter how far I ran, she'd always find a way back in. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, replaying every encounter, every argument, every moment we'd shared, trying to understand how things had spiraled so completely out of control. My mind raced with questions I couldn't answer, doubts I couldn't silence. She'd wormed her way into the fabric of my existence, and now I was left wondering if I'd ever be free. The next day, I went to the police, hoping they'd be able to help. I showed them the video, explained the situation, and watched as they took notes, nodding sympathetically. But their response was lukewarm at best. They assured me they'd look into it, but they couldn't offer much beyond vague promises. Without concrete evidence of harassment or a direct threat, their hands were tied. It was the same story everywhere I turned. Friends, co-workers, even family, everyone offered support, but no one could truly understand the depth of the nightmare I was living. Taylor had crafted an unbreakable web, a cage built from shadows and whispers, one that kept me trapped even as I fought to escape. I realized, with a sinking feeling, that she'd succeeded in her goal. She'd made herself inescapable, a permanent fixture in my life. I began to change my routines, constantly looking over my shoulder, double-checking my locks, even avoiding social media altogether. But no matter what I did, the feeling of her presence persisted, like a shadow I couldn't shake. I became paranoid, isolated, convinced that at any moment she'd reappear ready to tear down whatever progress I'd made. It reached a point where I couldn't function, couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I was a shell, existing on the edge of a precipice, haunted by a past that refused to stay buried. I knew I needed to do something drastic, to take back control of my life once and for all. So I made a decision that, looking back, was as reckless as it was desperate. I hired a private investigator, someone who could help me find the evidence I needed to bring Taylor down. I didn't care about the cost. All I wanted was closure, a way to sever the ties that bound us, to rid myself of her influence once and for all. The investigator, a no-nonsense woman named Rachel, listened patiently as I explained my situation, her face unreadable. She promised to do everything she could to help, and for the first time in months, I felt a sliver of hope. Rachel's investigation took weeks, but she was thorough. She tracked down every digital footprint, every connection, every lingering trace of Taylor's interference. She discovered that Taylor had created multiple fake accounts, messaging people from my past, spreading rumors, even attempting to contact my new co-workers. She'd become an omnipresent force, reaching into every corner of my life, determined to destroy me. Armed with Rachel's findings, I went back to the police. This time I had hard evidence, proof of her harassment, her lies, her obsessive behavior. They took my case seriously, finally seeing the full extent of Taylor's manipulation. Restraining orders were filed, legal actions set in motion, and for the first time, I felt like I was regaining control. But Taylor wasn't done. She retaliated with a ferocity I hadn't anticipated, launching a smear campaign that left my personal and professional reputation in shambles. She spread lies, fabricated stories, and turned people against me, even as the legal system worked to rein her in. It was a war of attrition, a battle I couldn't escape, and one that left me drained, empty, a shadow of who I'd once been. In the end, I won. The courts ruled in my favor, granting me the peace I'd fought so hard to achieve. Taylor was forced to stop her harassment, to leave me alone, but the scars remained. I'd lost friends, opportunities, a part of myself that I'd never get back. I was free, but at what cost? As I walked away from the courthouse, a strange sense of emptiness settled over me. I'd spent so long fighting, so long caught in Taylor's web, that I didn't know how to live without the chaos. She'd become a part of me, an inescapable influence that lingered even in her absence. I realized then that some battles leave wounds that never fully heal, that some scars remain even when the war is over. In the end, I moved to a new city, started over once again, determined to rebuild my life from the ground up. I changed my name, cut ties with everyone who'd known us, and disappeared into anonymity, hoping that this time I could finally leave the past behind. But even now, as I sit in a quiet cafe, miles from the life I once knew, I can't shake the feeling that she's still out there, watching, waiting. I know that no matter where I go, no matter how far I run, Taylor will always be a part of me, a ghost haunting the corners of my mind, a reminder of the price I paid for my freedom.